This PowerPoint covers thyroid hormone synthesis and the effects of thyroid hormone. I want to point out that when you're talking to a medical professional, or even if a layperson says I'm having trouble with my thyroid hormones, it does not include calcitonin. Even though we know that calcitonin is made from parafollicular cells in the thyroid hormones are strictly the thyroid hormones produced within the follicles, such as thyroxine, also known as T4, or triiodothyronine, also known as T3. The anatomy and location of the thyroid gland. The thyroid gland is composed of many closed follicles formed by cuboidal epithelial cells. If you look at the slide in the lower left-hand corner of this slide, you'll see these oval-shaped structures that are surrounded by these cuboidal epithelial cells, and those are the follicles. Within the center of a follicle is a viscous fluid-like substance called colloid, and we'll talk a little bit more about colloid mixture a little later on. The thyroid gland is located immediately below the larynx and on each side of the anterior to the trachea, kind of a butterfly shape with the isthmus in the middle connecting the two lobes. So all the products of the thyroid gland include thyroxine, also known as T4, triiodothyronine, known as T3, and calcitonin. And we talked plenty about calcitonin in the previous lecture, so I'm not going to say any more about it. But I am going to reiterate, when I use the term thyroid hormones, I'm only referring to thyroxine or triiodothyronine. The major function of both T3 and T4, which are both thyroid hormones, is to profoundly increase metabolic rate of almost all tissues in the body. That's the main goal, and that's the normal function of it. So without thyroid hormone, you're going to have decreased metabolic rate. So it is necessary for normal function to have this hormone stimulate and increase our metabolic rate. The hypothalamic pituitary axis begins with the hypothalamus producing thyrotropin releasing hormone, which will stimulate the anterior pituitary to produce and secrete thyroid stimulating hormone. Thyroid stimulating hormone will then stimulate the thyroid gland to produce thyroid hormones, T3 and T4. The levels of these hormones will then give a negative feedback back to the hypothalamus to regulate production and secretion. Formation of thyroid hormone. There's several steps, and the first one being dietary iodine. The only way we get iodine is through our diet, and that is a key element, or I should say key mineral, in the formation of thyroid hormone. The next step is iodide trapping. We'll talk about that in just a few minutes. Then formation of a large globular protein called thyroglobulin. Then you'll have oxidation of the iodide into iodine. Then binding of the iodine to actual tyrosines within the thyroglobulin molecule. Then you have a process called coupling, which then produces the final product. Iodides in our diet. Formation of thyroid hormones require iodine, which is oxidized iodides. If you don't have any iodides, you're not going to have any thyroid hormone. We need to ingest about 50 milligrams of iodides per year. It's not a whole lot, but without it, we are not going to have thyroid hormone. Food sources are seafood, seaweed, eggs, dairy, or supplemented table salt. Thyroids are very efficient in recycling the iodide that they receive. However, if they are a little deficient, thyroid cells can take in about 50% of circulating iodides, and if they are significantly deficient, thyroid cells can absorb 100% of iodide's mineral in circulation. Iodide pump or iodide trapping. The basal membrane or basement membrane of thyroid follicle cells actively pump iodides from the blood into the cell. The activation and rate of iodide pumping is stimulated by thyroid-stimulating hormone. Once the iodide is inside the thyroid follicle cell, the iodides can't get out, therefore trapped. Once the iodides are in the follicle cells, they will then be oxidized into iodine. Oxidation of iodide ions into iodide. The first step to the formation of thyroid hormones is the oxidation of iodide ions into iodine. This requires an enzyme that's only located inside thyroid follicle cells called peroxidase. Without peroxidase, the thyroid gland cannot oxidize the iodine, and without oxidized iodine, you cannot produce any thyroid hormones. The formation of thyroglobulin is stimulated by thyroid-stimulating hormone. This hormone also stimulates iodide pumping. So when the thyroid-stimulating hormone binds to specific receptors on thyroid follicular cells, it stimulates both iodide trapping and the formation of thyroglobulin at the same time. Thyroid epithelial follicular cells secrete a semi-viscous substance called colloid into the center of a follicle. The main component of this colloid is a large glycoprotein called thyroglobulin. Each molecule of thyroglobulin contains about 70 tyrosine amino acids linked together. The stages of iodination of tyrosine occurs within the colloid mixture inside the follicle. It starts with tyrosine that forms the thyroglobulin undergoing iodination. It does this in two specific patterns. One is the tyrosine amino acid linked with one oxidized iodine, also called monoiodotyrosine, abbreviated MIT. The second way is a tyrosine amino acid linked with two oxidized iodines, and that is called diiodotyrosine, or abbreviated DIT. Coupling production of thyroid hormones. Coupling forms the thyroid hormones. This occurs within the colloid mixture. The coupling occurs when a monoiodotyrosine and a diiodotyrosine molecule bind with each other in different combinations. You see on here, one combination could be one MIT plus one DIT is going to form triiodothyronine, or T3. And the other combination is one DIT plus one DIT, and that will form thyroxine, T4. These are really the only two ways these hormones are coupled to form the different T3 and T4s. The final products of thyroid hormone synthesis during a cycle would be about 93% thyroxine and about 7% triiodothyronine. The process of coupling really is the only way the thyroid gland makes its final product. But this process can be blocked. It can be blocked with certain kinds of drugs that I have one listed here. There are several. I have propylthiouracil listed, and it's used to treat hyperthyroidism. But it can also be blocked with goitrogenic vegetables such as cabbage and broccoli, Brussels sprouts, and cauliflower. So individuals who are having problems with hypothyroidism, they are asked to avoid these vegetables to allow this coupling process to proceed. Storage of thyroid hormones. The thyroid gland can store 2 to 3 months worth of thyroid hormones in its follicles to meet the needs of the body. If there's problems with synthesis of thyroid hormones, such as maybe there's a deficiency of iodine, or if there's inflammation of the thyroid follicle cells, there won't be a noticeable difference in the amount of thyroid hormone until months later because of this ability of the thyroid gland to store it. Also, target cells can store a bit of the T4 hormone in their cells as well. Dissociation of thyroxine. T4 can dissociate back into 1 DIT plus 1 DIT and then converted back to T3. So it can go back and forth actually between T4 and T3. Most of the thyroid hormone released during a cycle is T4. I mentioned that earlier, about 93%. And about half of that T4 that's released is deiodinated in the target cell to T3. The other half is stored in the target cell. The conversion of T4 into T3 requires activation of the enzyme thyroid deiodinase. Inactivation of thyroid deiodinase can convert the T3 back to T4. A little bit about thyroxine, or T4. It is released slowly into circulation about every 6 to 7 days, so we could say weekly it's released. It is the storage form of the thyroid hormone. Our bodies do not use this form of thyroid hormone to facilitate any type of reaction. It needs to be disassociated or deiodinated into T3. The T3 is the active form. About 0.3% of thyroxine travels freely, and then the rest, which is most of it, 99.97%, will travel bound to a globular protein. 3% of the bound T4 binds to a lipoprotein, and the rest, and the majority, binds to thyroid binding prealbumin so that it can get to its target cell. T4 has a longer lifespan than T3, and its half-life is considered about 7 days. Triiodothyronine, or T3, is released more rapidly into circulation than T4 is. It's released about every 24 hours, sort of a circadian rhythm. It is the bioactive form of the hormone. About 0.3% travels free, kind of like T4, but most of it, 99.7%, travels bound. About 70 to 80% of the bound T3 binds to thyroid binding globulin. This thyroid binding globulin is synthesized in the liver. So you can see, or maybe you can speculate, that individuals that have liver damage may also have some problems with their thyroid hormone because they can't transport it properly. Triiodothyronine has a shorter lifespan than T4, and its half-life is 24 hours. Thyroid hormone activation of nuclear receptors. T3 and T4 diffuse through the target cell membrane and the nucleus. About half of the T4 that enters the cell is deiodinated into T3, and the remainder is stored. The T3 binds with a thyroid hormone receptor in the nucleus. The T3 hormone receptor complex will form a dimer with a retinoid X receptor that is located on a specific thyroid hormone response segment of the DNA strand within the target cell. And this binding will stimulate all processes of protein synthesis, but it specifically stimulates transcription. The effects of thyroid hormones T3 and T4, and mainly it's the effect of T3 since it is the bioactive form. It affects metabolic rate, body weight, other endocrine glands. It affects norepinephrine, carbohydrates, fats, plasma and liver fats, proteins, vitamins, bones and growth, respiration, blood pressure, heart rate, GI tract, the central nervous system, muscles, sleep, and gonads, just to name a few. Thyroid hormones affect a metabolic rate. Normal levels of thyroid hormone increase metabolism in almost every cell in the body. That's its job. We need thyroid hormone to increase the metabolism. Abnormal levels can alter metabolic rate, such as hypothyroidism, which is reduced thyroid hormone, can decrease basal metabolic rate to about half the normal rate. And hyperthyroidism can increase basal metabolic rate up to 60 to 100% above normal. Thyroid hormone effects on the body weight. Normal levels just maintain body weight, whatever your weight is. However, in the case of hypothyroidism, it'll cause weight gain despite a decrease in appetite. And in the case of hyperthyroidism, it'll cause a decreased body weight in spite of an increased appetite. Thyroid hormone effects on other endocrine glands. Thyroid hormone increases the rate and secretion of most endocrine glands while at the same time increasing the demands for those hormones, so there won't be an imbalance. Thyroid hormone effects on norepinephrine. Thyroid hormone is facilitatory over norepinephrine. It acts as an agonist, enhancing the effectiveness of norepinephrine. It will increase the body's response to norepinephrine by increasing the number of norepinephrine receptors and activating existing norepinephrine receptors. This increase or facilitatory effect will increase blood pressure and heart rate. Thyroid hormone effects on the cardiovascular system. Thyroid hormone will increase heart rate via norepinephrine to increase cardiac output, but it typically maintains mean arterial pressure, the MAP, because it'll increase systolic pressure while decreasing systolic pressure by the same amount so that you will not interfere with the mean arterial pressure. However, in cases of extreme hyperthyroidism, blood pressure can rise as high as 240 over 180. Thyroid hormone's effect on the cardiovascular system. The increased metabolism caused by normal levels of thyroid hormone will increase the demand to absorb more oxygen for ATP and eliminate more CO2 as a result of making ATP. Thyroid hormone also causes vasodilation, which will increase blood flow. It also increases the number of myosin proteins within cardiac muscle to increase the strength of heart contraction. This combination of increased blood flow plus strength of contraction will increase cardiac output. Thyroid hormone effects on respiration. The increased metabolism, which leads to an increased demand to absorb more oxygen and eliminate more CO2, will increase the rate and the depth of respiration to take more in and blow more out. Thyroid hormone effect on carbohydrates. Thyroid hormone stimulates all processes of carbohydrate metabolism. T4 activates intestinal glucose transporters, which will increase the rate of absorption. This will lead to increased serum glucose, which will then stimulate an increased release of insulin. This increased insulin will stimulate cellular uptake of glucose, which will then lead to increased glycolysis for energy production. It will also stimulate the liver to produce glucose either through gluconeogenesis or for breaking down the glycogen stores through glycogenolysis. Thyroid hormone effects on the GI tract function. Thyroid hormones is necessary for normal GI function. It facilitates peristalsis, the mixing and secretion of gastric juices. It's just necessary. However, in the case of hypothyroidism, it can lead to constipation because things will slow down. And in the case of hyperthyroidism, it'll cause diarrhea or dehydration. It decreases digestion and absorption of nutrients because it's forcing the products too fast through the system. Thyroid hormone effects on fats. Thyroid hormone stimulates mobilization of stored fat. It will increase plasma fatty acid concentration, and it will accelerate oxidation of free fatty acids by cells. So basically, thyroid hormone is trying to dump into the system all the substrates used for energy production between carbohydrates and fats. Thyroid hormone effects on plasma and liver fat concentration. Normal levels of thyroid hormone have no effect other than briefly increasing free fatty acids. In the case of hypothyroidism, it will cause an increase in plasma concentration of cholesterol and triglycerides and lead to excessive deposition of fat in the liver and can lead to atherosclerosis. In the case of hyperthyroidism, you'll have a decrease of plasma concentration of cholesterol and triglycerides by increasing secretion of cholesterol into the bile and increasing the number of LDL receptors on the hepatocytes. The liver will then increase LDL removal from circulation and secrete more cholesterol into these lipoproteins, thereby further reducing their circulation. Thyroid hormone effects on protein. Just like with carbohydrates, thyroid hormone stimulates all processes of protein metabolism, such as it increases protein absorption from the intestines, it increases catabolism, breakdown of proteins into amino acids, and anabolism, the creation of proteins from these free amino acids. Thyroid hormone stimulates protein synthesis regardless of dietary supply of the protein. Thyroid hormone effects on vitamins. Normal levels really have no effect. However, in the case of hyperthyroidism, it could cause a deficiency in vitamins, particularly the B vitamins, because of increased enzyme activity in the Krebs cycle. Thyroid hormone effects on bone growth. Thyroid hormone promotes bone growth in the developing human. It'll work with growth hormone and testosterone or estrogen, depending on the gender, to close the growth plates of the long bones. Thyroid hormone effects on muscles. The textbooks say that thyroid hormone increases muscle tone, but normal levels just give muscles a nice normal tone to them. However, in the case of hypothyroidism, there will be a decreased tone. The muscles will feel limp. Muscles are slow to contract and slow to relax in this kind of situation. In hyperthyroidism, it'll cause increased muscle tone to the point of causing tremors. And continuous increase in the secretion of thyroid hormone can lead to muscle weakness due to the increased protein catabolism. Thyroid hormone effects on the central nervous system. Thyroid hormone is essential for the developing baby. Thyroid hormone promotes growth and development of the brain during gestation and the first few years of postnatal life. It will also increase cerebration, which is your mental processes will be excited. It helps you think. It helps you remember. It helps you make good judgment. Hypothyroidism will kind of do the opposite. It causes mental sluggishness and fatigue, often referred to as brain fog. Whereas hyperthyroidism will cause very rapid mental activity, almost to the point of being manic. Your brain thinks so fast you can't really hang on to a thought. Thyroid hormone effect on sleep. Normal levels have no effect. However, in the case of hypothyroidism, you sleep continuously. You're always tired. You're constantly sleeping. Whereas in hyperthyroidism, it can lead to insomnia. You'll still get tired and want to go to sleep, but you lay down and you can't fall asleep. Thyroid hormone effects on gonads. Normal levels are necessary for normal function of the gonads. In the male, hypothyroidism can lead to total loss of libido, and hyperthyroidism can actually cause impotence. Thyroid hormone effects on gonads in the woman. Normal levels are necessary for normal function. However, women with hypothyroidism can also have a total loss of libido, but it affects their menstrual cycle. It will alter it, such as causing polymenorrhea, and it can lead to menorrhea. In the case of hyperthyroidism, it can cause oligomenorrhea and amenorrhea and affect the woman's ability to conceive.